The biggest mistake that people make when they're writing a cover letter is that they are throwing too much information out there to see what sticks versus being strategic about what they include.
Welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast, a podcast about women who work in sports. I'm your host, Jahaan Blake. After 15 years of working for 3 major league teams, including the Boston Red Sox, Los Angeles Dodgers, and the Chicago Cubs, I discovered the one thing I loved the most was helping women in sports shatter glass ceilings and take their seat at the table. I loved it so much that I made a business out of it. I have the honor of coaching high-performing women in the sports and entertainment industry and supporting them as they go after exactly what they want in their career. So if you are feeling tired of waiting on the sidelines, done being overlooked for promotions, and you're ready to pull ahead of the pack and take your career to the next level, girl, I'm here for it. I also created the Game of Her Own podcast to support you as well. We are here to share the stories of incredible women who work in sports and entertainment. These leaders and trailblazers will inspire you with their success and the lessons they've learned along the way to the top. Ladies, there is nothing like women empowering women. I am so honored you're here.
I'm sure you guys have noticed, jobs in the sports industry are just popping back up. I cannot open up LinkedIn without seeing a ton of job alerts. So today we are talking to Sara Salam, and she is going to talk to us about all things resume, cover letters, blogs, if you're writing blogs, LinkedIn. We're going to get into all that topics. And the great thing about Sara is she comes from the sports world. So she started her career in sports, really in college, but then when she got out, she worked for the Red Sox. We did not overlap. And then she also worked for the Clippers, and she worked in the HR space. So how great is it to have somebody who has been in this space, understands it, understands sports, just give us some tips really on how to go about writing cover letters, right? They can be a pain. I don't know about you, but I remember when I was writing those, I help my clients with them now. They're never fun. The resume writing, some things you should stay away from. Also, if you're getting into blogs right now and publishing articles on LinkedIn, which I'm all for it. I think you should do it. I think you should share your point of view. It helps you stand out. She's also going to give us some tips on blogs. So you guys ready? Let's do this. Sara, welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast. I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. We both worked for the Red Sox just at different times. So it only makes sense that you are part of this podcast. I know your career path is a little different than most guests that I've had on the show. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but take us back in time and tell us when you first fell in love with sports.
So my earliest memories of really having an affinity for sports was when I was in 3rd grade. It's kind of an interesting story. My 3rd grade teacher, Miss Burkaw, had a project in class built around the World Series. So she divided the class into 2 groups. One side of the classroom was the AL champions, which at that time were the New York Yankees. And then the other side of the classroom were the NL champions, which were the Atlanta Braves. So I was on the New York Yankees side, and which is kind of funny, moving forward to, the fact that I ended up working for the Red Sox. But at the time, the way she kind of framed these projects was not just around the sport itself, but all of the different layers associated with sports, like the stats and the teams and the characters or the players where they were from. And I just really fell in love with the multidimensional nature of it. It's a very unique way, I think, to look at sport, but it also created at that time, I was, let's call it 10 years old. It really created a sense of community in the classroom, but then also just kind of understanding how the stories of all of these different players in this game, in this series really came together. And that's where I would connect it to the power of story, which again, foreshadowing kind of connects to what I do today. I also have, I have a younger brother who played sports. He started playing t-ball, way back in the day. And I just remember being at games. I would score keep with my mom at times. So
Nice.
again, Yeah. So again, it became, it's much more about than what was happening on the field, but the statistics and the stories of the players and just the narrative around it. And so just the kind of the holistic experience of sport was really powerful and resonated with me.
What grade were you in when this
Third
project?
grade. I was in 1996.
Did you say third grade?
Third grade.
Wow. I don't want to talk about what grade I was in 1996. We won't have that discussion, Sarah, but
We can have
but wow, it's a pretty interesting project for their all right. And you really fell for it. Give us a little bit of your background of working in sports. So you worked, everyone knows by now you worked for the Red Sox, but who else did you work for? Talk about that time.
Yeah, definitely. So my first kind of work experience actually took place in college. So I went to UCLA for undergrad. And actually, when I was applying to colleges, one of the big things or key considerations that I had was I really wanted to go to a school with a football team. And it sounds so silly, but my rationale was that I wanted to go to a school that had the kind of spirit and again, the sense of community. And I had grown up again with this kind of love of sport, and I understood what it meant to people and how it could bring people together. And so I really wanted that. And then my sophomore year, I joined the Daily Bruin sports department as a reporter, where I covered water polo, baseball, tennis. So at that time I was 19. My junior year, I became the sports editor. So I managed the section, again, covered baseball. That year, I also worked in athletics and development at UCLA. So I like for their fundraising department, things like that. So really is when I was in college, when I fully immersed myself in sport for sport's sake. And then it was after college that I got my first job with the Red Sox, this was in the fall of 2010. And then I worked with the Red Sox for 5 seasons.
Wait a second. So you're in college and then you're like, and then I got my job with the Red Sox. Was that hard? Like, talk to us about that. For those who are listening, who are trying to figure out how to get their foot in the door, right? Like some people are listening. The one common denominator that we all have is it's high achieving women and some men who listen to the podcast. Now, some people are trying to get their foot in the door regardless of level. Like, how did that happen? Because you kind of just glossed all over that. Like that was easy.
Sure. Yeah, it certainly wasn't easy. So at the time, so for context, when I was applying for jobs, I started looking at jobs in the fall of 2009, 2010. So this is right after the financial crisis, right? Or in the midst of it. And so my class was one of the first groups of college students that was trying to find a job in the midst of all of this chaos, right? So at the time, I was very diligent at reaching out to people that I knew through family, through friends. And this is before I had my HR experience, right? So I'm just trying to figure out like what works. I will say that I have a family friend of ours had recommended, like you should reach out to the Sox and see, like you're graduating, like see what the opportunities are. So I will say like the power of networking is really critical, and the power of making contact and being persistent and making sure that you're presenting yourself in the most professional way possible is critical, especially, when you're 22 coming out of school, you have literally nothing to show but a degree and maybe some internship or work experience. It's really those soft skills, I think, that make a huge difference. My first role at the Red Sox was a part-time role at the time. It was in ticket services, the ticket services associate position.
Okay.
So that role has since become full-time, but at the time it was a paid hourly position. And so I, took a leap of faith. I moved across the country for a part-time job, took on that role. I was in that role for the entire 2011 season. I realized that I didn't love ticketing. I really loved the people-facing aspect of it, but I felt that I wasn't a huge fan of the transactional nature of it. I'm more of a relationship builder and long-term relationship builder versus, you see a fan, you help them out, and then you never see them again. That for me wasn't the most fulfilling, and I wanted something that perhaps would I wanted to be in a role that allowed me to grow and maintain relationships and help develop people. That's what I liked. So I had a bunch of different conversations with people internally. It seemed like HR was the right way to go. And the long story short is there was some reshuffling in the HR department. A new head of HR came in, And I went to her and was like, hey, like I'm really interested in HR. I'd love to, have a conversation and try and figure out if that's something that we could like work out. And it took a while. And I by my nature I'm not a patient person. I was 23 at the time. So I'm thinking like, hey, like this is going to be so fast. Like it's going to be great. Like did not happen that way. She went through the process. She posted the roles internally. I applied, she was considered, it was an HR coordinator position is the position that I ended up being hired for. So it was quite a process to go through. And again, at the time, I'm like in my head, I'm like, why, again, I'm like, why is this taking so long? Like, what, like, why? Like obviously I'm a great candidate. Like, why, like, this is me,
Yep.
like,
Yeah.
I'm the shit at 23,
Mm-hmm.
So eventually, her name's Amy Warrior. She's still there. She's now the chief HR officer at
Nice.
the Boston Red Sox. Yeah. And so this was her first season was 2012, I believe it was. So I started in HR on her team with another individual, Mike, that she had hired working on that she called it the front facing side of HR. So all of the recruiting, employee facing stuff, events, programs. I ran the internship program, the co-op program, orientations, onboarding, all that kind of stuff. I kept taking on more responsibility. Eventually, I got to a point where, and I'm from Southern California, born and raised. There was a winter, it was the winter of 2014-15, where we got 86 inches of snow. And I said to myself, I cannot do this like for the rest of my
Yeah.
life. I need
Mm-hmm.
to go back to California. My parents were older at the time,
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to be near my family. Fortunately, or coincidentally, or happenstantially, whatever word you want to use, there was an opportunity that was posted with the LA Clippers that summer of 2015. So I applied for that role, was lucky enough to be accepted into that position, and I went on to work for the Clippers for a couple of seasons, 2 seasons in LA.
In HR as well?
Yes, as an HR manager.
Okay, good. So I'm here. You got your start through, networking, having somebody, let's call it, support you as you try to figure out how you're going to get this job with the Red Sox. And you said something that was key there was that the networking is important, but is really when you got there and like what just someone can help you get there in your network. But gosh, when you get in, it's all on you, right?
It's such a good point. And I also myself felt like I needed to show that I was a good choice by having this referral, that it was helpful, that it was a good reflection on that person, right?
Yes.
Because if you screw it up, to some extent, you might be compromising that referral's credibility, right? With whoever. There's a certain extent where you can't control certain things, but you can control how you show up and how you behave.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I thought that was really important that I showed up and showed that they made a good choice by making good on what the referral's recommendation was.
Yes. Yeah. Well said. Okay. So now you Red Sox, Clippers, you're working in pretty major markets here and you're in sports. And if people are watching, they're like, yeah, she's doing it and she's in sports and what's next? And you decide to venture out on your own. Right. And what was that like?
So when I left the Clippers, I went to I call it like a boutique leadership consulting company. It was small, 6 employees. At the time, I was really interested and still am interested in psychometrics. So understanding how I don't like using the term personality test because I don't think that's an accurate representation of what they are, but I call it more mind mapping, like how people's brains actually like kind of influence how they show up in the world. And that's one data point. It's not an all end all be all, but it is a really interesting kind of thing to think about. So I kind of dabbled in that for a little while. I did some stuff in startups, kind of went smaller. I started, with the Red Sox, huge company, at the time had 1,800 employees, including game day staff, Florida operations, all your scouts distributed throughout the world, et cetera, to, very small companies. So I've seen it all, which is interesting. And I think really helps me in my career now. But flash forward to like 2019 and my father passed away. So this was in the summer of 2019, and losing a parent is, it's very difficult to articulate unless you've kind of been through it. But for me, the way that life event for me was very critical and challenging me to question, was I really happy with what I was doing? Was I, life's too short. Like, am I doing everything that I possibly can to make myself happy and to find fulfillment in my life? And so that's really when I started looking more into the writing, focusing on the writing piece of my career. When I was 11 years old, I started writing movie reviews for my hometown newspaper. And yeah, 11 years old. Can you believe it? 11 years old. And I did that for a number of years until I was 18 and went to college. So I guess you could say there's always been this thread of journalism in my background. And I've kept journals most consistently since I went to Boston, but I have found samples of journal entries, I guess you could call them, from when I was in fifth grade, so like 1998, which are fascinating to read at this point in my life. But so I've always loved writing. And again, I mentioned I worked for the Daily Bruin when I was in college. When I was in high school, I was the editor-in-chief of my high school newspaper. So there has always been that kind of thread there. So I would do it on the side. I started a blog in 2000, I think it's 2015, 2016. And I just decided that, it was time for me to focus more on that. So I started writing more consistently. I started working for a magazine publisher called DiversityCom that publishes 6 magazines, and I would write for them and do research for them. I wrote my first book. I published my first full-length novel in 2020, last year in April of 2020. I'm actually working on my 10th book. My 10th book will be coming out next month. My most recent release is a book called How to Write a Resume, coincidentally.
Yes.
So that one, again, is a testament to my 10-ish years in HR and recruiting, and really a means to educate job seekers on how to understand the job market, how to present yourself in a professional and meaningful way so that a recruiter or hiring manager wants to meet you. Because that's really the key. That's a lot of times that's your first impression. So it's literally two forks converging. I'm at a point now where I'm using my writing background to help my clients create content around their career narratives and their professional experience so they can best present themselves to employers, which again is the bread and butter of my corporate career. So, I'm super happy doing what I'm doing today. And it's kind of funny how linear it looks looking back, but coming here, it was a very windy road.
Yes. Well, and I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that you're here for this interview, because your last book, How to Write a Resume, which is awesome. Congratulations on all of your books and being a published author. That's fantastic. That's huge.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was one of those things too, where once it clicked for me, I just went, and that's kind of how I knew it felt right, and it felt like I was doing what I was meant to do. I think that's, at least for me, what makes it all worth it, is that it synthesizes all of the things that I enjoy, which are helping people and writing. So that's
I love that. That's fantastic.
Hey, Jahaan here. I hope you're enjoying the interview. I'm sure you are thinking about your own career right now and how you can pull out in front of the pack to take your career to the next level. For 18 years, supporting women in sports has been my favorite part of my career, and I would love to support you. Whether it's joining my free Game of Her Own community or one of my one-on-one coaching programs, I am here for you. Send me a message at jblake@jahaanblake.com or DM me on Instagram @jahaanblake, and let's schedule a time to have a free session. I cannot wait to hear from you. All right, let's get back to why you're here.
Well, speaking of helping people and things that you love and things that other people do not, let's talk about, since you're here, let's talk about cover letters. Talk about cover letters, resumes, and blogs. That's what we're going to talk about over the next 10 minutes. But talk to us about cover letters. Do we need them? How do we stand out? I know you need them, but I read a stat that 55% of hiring managers don't read cover letters. So if you can just talk to us about it, how you stand out, what's one thing you have to do when it comes to a cover letter? We are all ears. People are turning this up right now and getting out their pens.
So it's interesting what you said too. 55% of hiring managers or employers don't read cover letters. That's interesting because there's also 45% of hiring managers and employers that do, right? So and that's still a fairly significant percentage, right? So if we're getting getting into the numbers, I would say if it's under 20%, it's probably not worth it. But if it's anything above that, it's still a fairly significant group of people that you have an opportunity to resonate with, and that many more people have an opportunity to pick you as a candidate for their position. In addition to that, in regards to the content, it's very important for job seekers to be able to communicate their professional narrative, or what I refer to as their career chronicle. So basically what that means is, how do you use your professional background, your skills, your experience, your hard and soft skills to convey to a hiring manager or recruiter what your value proposition is and how you fit within their organization, and specifically the role that you're applying for. So I think a good way to approach this is that you assume that the hiring manager or recruiter knows nothing about you, knows nothing about your background, and to essentially spoon feed them the value that you offer based on achievements that you've had in your career, based on things that you've done for companies that have added value, and write a story around that. Again, kind of connecting back to the power of story, and how a cover letter is basically an opportunity for you to tell that story. You have, your intro. This is the job I'm applying for. This is why I'm great, in summary form. That's 2 sentences. The body of your cover letter is essentially illustrating this story and communicating why you're the best fit based on, again, your experiences, your accomplishments, achievements, etc. And then concluding it with that thread as to why you're the right fit. It's very formulaic in some sense, but it's critical that the job seeker understand, again, what their value is and how to communicate that. I think that's probably the biggest mistake that I see, is a lot of people think of resumes, but also cover letters as well, as a way to info dump on hiring managers and recruiters and just throw everything out there and see what sticks. But it's very important for a job seeker to understand what to include, and what they include is just as important, if not more so, than what they exclude. You want to always be answering the question, why are you the best candidate for the position? And for the information that you share on a resume or a cover letter, why would a hiring manager or recruiter care about this information? Will they care? And if they do care, then yeah, put it on there. But if they don't, if you think they don't, then it probably shouldn't be there. And I kind of go through this in my book. I have like a checklist of what questions you can ask yourself as you're writing your resume, what those things are, and how to kind of have that internal dialogue with yourself as you're creating your content.
Good. Okay, good. I'll link to the book for sure in the show notes. So say one more time, what's the biggest mistake that you see people make when they're writing a cover letter?
The biggest mistake that people make when they're writing a cover letter is that they are throwing too much information out there to see what sticks, versus being strategic about what they include. A lot of times they will share things that they think might be interesting, or maybe like a fun fact, or, something that is, I don't know, just like cool and exciting, but it might not necessarily be answering the question for the hiring manager as to why they want to meet them. And if you're not answering that question, then they're not going to invite you in, or they're not going to want to talk to you. I make this recommendation for all career content that job seekers put out into the world. It's to obviously be mindful of how you're presenting yourself, but be mindful of the job that you're applying for, the requirements of the job, and make sure that you're positioning yourself in a way that shows that you add value to the company and can do that job based on your past experience. That's kind of that's the thought process that I encourage people to think about putting together their material.
Got it. So, right. I always like to tell people to do a shitty first draft, just like write what comes to mind. And then what I hear you saying is you can use that as like your checklist, almost like, okay, did I answer the question of why they would want me to work here? Do I show how I can bring value? Right. And like, it's kind of, and maybe if they bought your book, they can go through that checklist and clean up their first draft. I know a lot of my clients and people in general, really just spend a lot of time on the cover letter and get hung up on it. But I feel like your tips are helpful in just kind of just crafting the message, just answering a few questions and then going for it.
Absolutely. And I also recommend too, the points that you share in a cover letter should be consistent with what you're sharing in a resume. The things that you include in your cover letter, because you're answering the same question, right? Why would a hiring manager or recruiter want to meet me? Why am I the best fit for the job? The cover letter is more, one way you can think of it is the cover letter is more of an opportunity to actually write that narrative in paragraph form, right? To tell the literal story. Whereas your resume is more of it's bullets, it's shorthand, it's a more condensed version of that. So those two materials, your resume and your cover letter, should be complementary documents that support why you should be why you're the best person for the job.
All right, let's talk about resume.
Yeah.
So what's one thing we have to do here to stand out?
One thing, again, it kind of goes back to the idea of being mindful of what you include as well as what you exclude. It's a matter of answering the question, why are you the best candidate for the position? It's, again, not an info dump. It's not a place to list every single thing you've ever done for a company. It's not a job description. I'm not asking you, or a recruiter or hiring manager is not asking you to just list all of the things that you do day to day. That's not what it is. It's an opportunity for you to tell your story about your professional experience, answering the question why you're the best candidate for the job that you're applying for. One of the things too that is becoming more, not common, but I think more important for job seekers to be mindful of is how they illustrate their transferable skills, or skills that at face value may not align specifically with a job that they're performing or applying for, but they do translate well based on their past experience. So an example of that might be, if let's talk about sports for an example. If I'm a salesperson for a pharmaceutical company and I have these great numbers, I'm on the leaderboard consistently, I bring in a ton of revenue, et cetera, like those skills will transfer quite well to, say, a ticket sales position, or maybe even a sponsorship position, a partnership marketing position, anywhere where revenue generation may be key to the function of the job. But it's up to the job seeker to illustrate that to a hiring manager, because sometimes employers they're not making that connection when they're looking through piles and piles of resumes, or they're flipping through their ATS or applicant tracking system, just clicking through trying to find people that they believe are qualified. You need to be able to showcase that to them as a job seeker, and draw that line and make that connection for them.
Okay. Do you think people should have multiple versions of their resume depending on the job they're applying for?
The short answer is yes. Like I said, the key is to be very specific in how you're answering the question, why am I the best candidate for this position, right? So a lot of times you could, in theory, extrapolate out and say, if I'm a financial analyst and I'm applying for strictly financial analyst positions or CPA positions, that's different. Absolutely, you can use the same resume because it's literally the same function. Cool. That's, I think, a good rule of thumb. If you're applying for the same function, that's great. I guess I'm thinking more of jobs that are more broad in scope, some marketing positions in one company might be very different from a marketing position in another, because there's so many different forms of marketing these days. There's a lot more technical, back end, e-commerce marketing, and then you also or SEO, and then you also have more of the branding and the kind of visual component. So it really just depends on your function and how you communicate that value.
Yes. I also, when it comes to communicating value, I always talk to my clients about telling the story through numbers. So quantifying things that you do. Is that something that you work with your clients on too, is trying to find those numbers? Because everybody has some sort of metric, some sort of big number that they can pull out to tell the story of the work that they do.
You're absolutely right. That's one of the key critical things about being able to show your value. Numbers are a universal language. Everybody understands numbers. And if you can communicate your background in the form of dollars, percentages, cost savings, where you rank on a leaderboard, for example, how much money you saved a company, how many, for a recruiting position, how many people you've hired, what your retention rates are what the turnover is things like that. That's data that hiring managers and recruiters will understand in the context of their business, and they'll be able to make a judgment call that much more quickly to determine whether or not you're a good fit for their opportunity. And surely just sharing the numbers shows that you can think of yourself as a component in the greater company and where you fit. That's important too. It's to be able to communicate to the hiring manager or employer or recruiter that you understand where you fit in their organization, and you can show them that in a way that will resonate with them.
Once you're done doing all this work on your resume, which it is it can be another job, a full-time job. So once you're done, I always recommend my clients, okay, go take everything that you just worked on, copy paste, and put that in your LinkedIn profile. How do you feel about like LinkedIn and making sure that that tells the same story?
When I work with my clients, typically I recommend they do, I call it the big three, right? Your resume, your cover letter, and your LinkedIn profile. And a lot of that content can be very consistent. I do recommend for LinkedIn that you write some sort of short bio, I'd say between 300 and 500 words for that about section at the top there. That again is an opportunity for you to showcase your professional narrative or your career chronicle. A lot of times you can use that content in a cover letter also because the narrative is fairly consistent. But I certainly recommend there being, and I kind of cover this in my book, but the different components of what that bio should look like, what you're trying to accomplish with it, right? If you're a job seeker, for example, and you're actively looking, your bio is going to look different than if you're a passive candidate or somebody who, isn't looking. So that's like one thing to keep in mind. I think in terms of experience, it's good to have, you can list some stuff from your resume. I usually recommend no more than 3 bullets because a lot of times I tend to describe LinkedIn profiles as similar to a pitch sheet. So a way, just like a quick snapshot of what you've done, what you've accomplished, what you're on LinkedIn for, is another question, whether you're there to network or look for a job or find customers or whatever it is. So all of those specifics should be kind of baked into your strategy in terms of the content that you choose to share.
Okay. So you're saying obviously the about section, that's going to tell the right story. And you're saying fewer bullet points in the job descriptions. Is that right?
That's what I'm saying. Yes. Yes.
Oh,
it comes back to the strategy, right? What you include is just as important as what you exclude. I also recommend using terms in the about section that make you more searchable. A lot of companies will use LinkedIn Recruiter and they'll use Boolean logic, which is a search methodology to find keywords in your profiles. So keywords are critical. It's not necessarily about listing so many things, but being, again, strategic with what you include.
Okay, got it. Talk to me about blogs. What I'm like starting to see happening is everyone like realizes, hey, I know stuff, right? Like I may be a coordinator, intern, director, VP, doesn't matter. I have stuff to share and I'm gonna put out some things that are on my mind and share my point of view with my industry. LinkedIn is a perfect place to do that. Not everybody's a writer though. So what tips would you give to people who are starting to blog?
I always tell people that the most important thing is to tell the truth. And what I mean by that is that we all have different experiences. We all have unique backgrounds. Things happen to us throughout our lives, professional, personal, what have you. Sometimes they intersect. And it's important to be honest and genuine. My personal motto is facts are facts, but truth is personal. In most cases, what I've seen is the blogs that have great traction are the ones that are honest and truthful, but have information to back it up, right? Or stories to back it up, personal experiences, facts, statistics, data. Those are the things that bring added value to blogs and what will ultimately increase readership if what the writer is saying is valuable and resonates with their audience. And again, most times that is a result of genuine experience. And you don't have to be an amazing writer to do that, to be honest and be genuine. There's an Ernest Hemingway quote that I love. It's, "There is nothing to writing. All you need to do is sit at a typewriter and bleed." And I just love that. I mean, obviously typewriters aren't a thing anymore, but the spirit of that, the spirit of that I think is really beautiful because he's basically saying anybody can write. It's just a matter of showing up in your truth.
That's good. I like that.
Right? You can steal it.
Deep on the podcast.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are some really good tips. Now it's my turn to ask you some rapid fire questions.
Let's do it.
First thing that comes to mind, 12 questions. What is your favorite sports moment?
I think it was World Series 2013, October 30th, Game 6, winning at Fenway Park.
Wow. I was there.
We're there. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine? We were in the same place at the same time.
We definitely were. I just like abandoned my work. I don't think my boss was too happy with me. And I remember hopping on the train, took the L to the airport and just flew in literally for the game. Obviously was up all night with all of y'all celebrating, and then came back home the next day and had to get right back to work.
You get it right there. I love it.
It was so fun. What is something people always get wrong about you?
That I'm like that I'm a really social person. I am really social, but I also have an introverted side to me, and I like to be on my own a lot. I think that's maybe a common misconception.
What is one food you wouldn't want to give up?
Probably bagels.
Are you a morning or a night person?
Most definitely a morning person.
Favorite holiday?
I don't really have a favorite holiday, but I have a favorite season. Can I answer that question?
You sure can. You can make up a whole new question. What's your favorite season?
I love the spring. And I just mentioned that because, we're in the midst of spring and I feel like it's very underrated. I just love the sense of rebirth and freshness and newness. And I think to me, I was going to say New Year's Eve for that reason, or New Year's Day, because I just like the sense of beginning, I think is really what resonates with me.
All right. I like it. What job would you be absolutely horrible at doing?
Anything with like accounting or spreadsheets, like with numbers.
Yes. What product would you seriously stockpile if you found out they weren't going to sell it anymore?
Probably, I have this leather-bound journal that I love, and I have got stacks and stacks of journals. So I would probably have to place a really large order for one of those.
What's your favorite app?
I use Map My Run a lot. I like to know, I walk a lot in my neighborhood. So I like to know, like how far I'm walking, my steps, things like that.
Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram?
Instagram.
Who's your biggest inspiration in life?
My mama.
Yeah. Aww. As a child, what did you wish to become when you grew up?
I wanted to be a professional writer, like with air quotes. It's really funny. I found this piece of artwork that I did when I was in 5th grade. And one of the things that we had to write on it was, when I grow up, I want to be, and it was a professional writer. So here I am.
Look at that. Okay. Last one. Finish this sentence. The future of women working in sports is
bright.
Love it. Okay. This has been fantastic. Tell us, how can people get in touch with you? I know that you just gave us a lot of great tips. Some people just don't like to write. It's hard to write about themselves and it's challenging. So I know there's your book and your services. So why don't you tell us all about that?
Yeah, definitely. So the best place to reach me is at my website, which is bysarasalam.com/career consulting, is where I post all of my offerings from a services standpoint. There you can find the link to my book. And I also have an online course that shares similar content. There's a place on there that you can message me through my email address that should you have any specific questions.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I hope all of this information has been valuable.
So what did you think of this episode? Do you know another woman who works or is aspiring to work in sports? Would you do me a favor and share this with them? It would mean so much if together we could support and inspire other women on their journey. And let's stay connected. I love meeting and talking to new people. Follow me on Instagram at Jahaan Blake and join the free Game of Her Own community by visiting jahaanblake.com. I can't wait to meet you.